Joining me now is Washington Congressman Adam Smith. He's the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. Thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me. Good morning.
President Zelenskyy said he's open to making painful concessions on territory and even some sort of demilitarized zone in the Donbass, that highly contested region known for coal mining and rare minerals such as lithium. While Russia hasn't moved off its maximalist demands and keeps bombing Ukrainian cities, is this something that you think will be good enough for Russia, because they're standing firm? It seems like they're not willing to make concessions of their own.
No, we don't know at this point is the honest answer to that question. But this is the mistake that Trump made from the start of this, from the moment he got elected in November, and from, frankly, the rhetoric he was using during the campaign. He put all the pressure on Zelenskyy. For some reason, he seemed to think that Zelenskyy was the one who was perpetuating the war and was the impediment to peace. And that gave Putin the feeling that if he just held out long enough, it's possible that the U.S. would abandon Ukraine and abandon our European allies. It basically showed weakness to Putin and encouraged him to keep pushing for his maximalist demands. Now, it was perfectly appropriate to talk to Ukraine and talk to Eastern Europe about the fact that getting all of Ukraine's territory back was not realistic. Some agreement needed to be made. But absolutely, we had to make it clear that we were going to guarantee sovereign Ukraine's security going forward. And that, to date, Trump hasn't done, still hasn't done it. And the other thing we had to make clear was that we were going to stand up to Putin and not allow him to take Ukraine. With all the rhetoric, that Oval Office meeting that you referenced back in February, I mean, if Putin saw that meeting, and he did, he could have clearly concluded, U.S. is going to bail. I may as well keep fighting. So that's the message that now has to be sent, is that, no, we're going to stand with Ukraine. We're going to stand with the 53-nation alliance that has been supporting Ukraine since Russia started this war. And Russia's not going to be able to take all of Ukraine. That is what forces Putin to accept this agreement. And we still haven't seen, I think, that sort of strong rhetoric. Now, I think Congressman Turner outlined it quite well. I wish President Trump would say something similar, because that's the message that needs to be sent to Putin right now.
But President Trump seems to be being a little bit coy right now. He told Politico on Friday that he's in no rush to endorse Zelensky's proposal and said, quote, he doesn't have anything. He, being Zelenskyy, doesn't have anything until I approve it. So we'll see what he's got. Does Ukraine's fate ultimately rest on convincing Donald Trump that it's conceding enough to satisfy him? How far can Ukraine realistically compromise on territory and make Donald Trump feel like he's in control, because he clearly wants to feel like he's in control?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it is so unfortunate, because there was such a clear message to send, as I said, a message of strength and unity with Ukraine to push back on Russia. And Trump has sent, a completely opposite message to that. Now, one thing is true. Trump wants to get to peace in Ukraine. He wants to take credit for that. And he's very self-focused, which, of course, undermines the negotiations, since this should be about protecting Ukraine and ending the war, not about Donald Trump's ego. But we all, to some degree, live in that world right now. So, yeah, I mean, that's part of the challenge. Now, Europe has stepped up and helped Ukraine. Ukraine has stepped up and helped themselves. For all the things that the Trump administration has said and done in the last year to undermine Ukraine, Ukraine's still fighting. And that's the other, myth that Trump has contributed to, is that somehow Russia is winning and Ukraine is on their last gasp. I mean, Russia is absorbing unbelievable casualties and only gaining tiny little bits of land. Ukraine is still fighting and preserving sovereign democratic Ukraine. And if Trump could recognize that, that would help. So I wouldn't go so far as to say, unless Zelenskyy pleases Trump, he's done. But it certainly undermines the ability to get to peace, that has to be such a focus of what Zelensky's doing, at the same time trying to fight off the brutal invasion that Putin launched almost 4 years ago now.
Congressman Smith, I'm interested in the role of Congress in all of this, with Donald Trump personally driving the negotiations. What guardrails should Congress be demanding to ensure any deal protects Ukraine's long-term security and doesn't reward continued Russian aggression?
Well, the biggest role we play is frankly by pressuring President Trump to stand with Ukraine. And I think, Mike Turner, Mike Rogers, Don Bacon, a variety of different members of Congress, Senator Wicker, have done a good job of that. to make it so that Trump doesn't think that politically he can get away with abandoning Ukraine. And I think, Congress doing that. We just passed the National Defense Authorization Act, which showed strong support for Ukraine and Eastern Europe. We authorized another $400 million in security assistance. We made it clear that we can't pull troops out of Eastern Europe. Those messages from Congress put pressure on Trump and let him know that he can't, in a politically cost-free way, abandon Ukraine. The way I like to put it is Trump needs to recognize that no one gave Neville Chamberlain the Nobel Peace Prize for giving up all of Czechoslovakia to Hitler. So as long as Trump understands that message, that he will not be rewarded for abandoning Ukraine, that keeps the pressure on him to not abandon Ukraine. So that's the role that Congress can play. And I think in a bipartisan, bicameral way, particularly in the last, 4 or 5 months, I think we've done a pretty good job of that.
Now, as we keep an eye on Mar-a-Lago, I want to ask you about Thursday's strikes on Islamic State targets in Nigeria. You have warned that the attack looks disconnected from any clear strategy. What specific answers are you demanding from the administration about their strategic objectives and an end game in Nigeria? At what point should Congress step in if the administration keeps launching strikes without a broader plan or without engaging with Congress at all?
Yeah, no, two separate questions there, but one in terms of the policy problem. You have to understand that this is not just a Nigeria problem. This is a West Africa problem. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, there are all manner of different Islamic terrorist groups, ISIS affiliates, Al-Qaeda affiliates, and then just criminal organizations and tribal conflicts that have made that whole region deeply unstable and also vulnerable to extremist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And some of that's going on in Nigeria. Some of that's going on in surrounding countries. So how do these strikes in Nigeria get after that larger problem? And for Trump to basically put all this down to a group of people who are trying to terrorize Christians, that's not what's going on here. This is a much larger, much more complicated problem than that. And a few one-off strikes are not going to change that. Does this drag the U.S. into a conflict in Nigeria and potentially more broadly in West Africa? And the most important thing we need to do is find partners in the region that we can work with. We're not going to be able to do this on our own, and we shouldn't. Now, the fact that Nigeria is cooperating to some degree with these strikes is a positive, but how does that fit into that larger picture? And Trump presenting this as some sort of religious war between Muslims and Christians doesn't help. There are extremists in all religions. How can we bring greater peace and stability to the region? Lastly, on your question about Congress, this administration doesn't seem to think they have to tell us much of anything. I mean, they bombed Iran, Syria, Nigeria. They continue to bomb in the Caribbean and in the Pacific without any notification. So we have to keep putting pressure on them to follow the law and follow the Constitution and give us that notification. And then our Republican colleagues are most important in helping in that effort.
One last question for you. It's hard to watch what's going on in Mar-a-Lago and not think about that meeting in February that so quickly went off the rails, that very pugilistic meeting in the White House. What do you expect from this meeting? I mean, they've met now. This is the fourth time that they've met. They seem to have reached some sort of ability to speak to each other without it turning into the screaming match that we saw before. What are you expecting out of this meeting?
It's hard to know what to expect. What I hope for is I hope that we lean more towards the Trump who doesn't want to be seen as abandoning Ukraine to Russian aggression, that he actually shows greater support for Zelenskyy, greater support for Ukraine, and he moves off some of this ridiculous rhetoric from that earlier meeting. Because understand, in the MAGA universe, these issues are pretty deep-seated, that this notion that somehow, Russia is really more of our friend than Ukraine. Liz Cheney memorably put it as the Putin wing of the Republican Party. I want to see Trump move away from that and move towards what Michael Turner was talking about earlier in terms of recognizing Ukraine is fighting for freedom and sovereignty against a brutal aggressor who's trying to take it through force. No question where we should be. So I hope that when this comes out, President Trump will be more clearly with Zelenskyy, because that's the message that needs to be sent to force Putin to end his war.
Congressman Adam Smith, always good to have you with us. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate it.